She stood in a kitchen that smelled like burnt butter. At 4 a.m, flour on her cheek, her apron stained from yesterday and the day before that, the only light coming from a single bulb above a stove that had not told the truth about its own temperature in years. 2 years later, she stood in the same kitchen, the same smell of butter in the air. But now 14 orders were stacked on the counter, and her phone was ringing, and the caller ID read, Walmart Inc., Bentonville, AR. But that call was still 2 years away. And before it came, there was the matter of $11.47, which was everything she had on the morning she decided to start. Marceline Odom had been let go from her job on a Wednesday. She was 7 months pregnant at the time. The company had fewer than 50 employees, which meant the law that was supposed to protect women in her situation did not apply to her. Her manager had said he was sorry. He had looked at her stomach when he said it. She had cleaned out her desk and driven home and sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. That was 2 years ago. The man she had married left before Auden was born. He did not leave dramatically. He did not slam a door or make a speech. He simply stopped coming home, and then he stopped answering his phone, and then the phone itself stopped working. She learned later that he had moved to Houston. She did not learn much else. She did not try to. The SNAP benefits had carried them for a while. The savings account had carried them after that. But savings accounts are not rivers. They do not refill themselves. They are jars and jars empty. And this one had emptied slowly, and then all at once in the way that money disappears when you are careful with it, and it still is not enough. On that particular morning, Marcy sat at the kitchen table with an envelope in front of her. She opened it and took out what was inside: a $5 bill, 4 ones, a quarter, 2 dimes, 2 pennies. She laid the bills flat on the table, with her palm pressing out the creases the way she always did, because there was something in the act of pressing money flat that made it feel like more than it was. It was not more than it was. It was $11.47. The quarter was cold in her hand. She held it for a moment longer than necessary. Then she put everything back in the envelope and folded it closed and put it in the drawer beside the stove. The drawer did not close all the way. It had not closed all the way since she moved in. She stood at the counter and looked at the kitchen. The stove was a Kenmore, bought second-hand from a man on Choctaw Drive who had posted it online for $60. It ran 25 degrees hotter than whatever temperature the dial claimed. She had learned this by burning things and adjusting. Everything she made in that oven required a mental correction. Set it to 350. Know it means 375, and act accordingly. She had gotten used to it the way you get used to anything that is yours and imperfect and not going anywhere. She opened the cabinet above the stove. Inside, on the second shelf pushed to the back behind a box of rice and a can of black beans, were the things left from the last SNAP purchase. A bag of all-purpose flour 3/4 full, a block of unsalted butter, a bag of dark brown sugar, a half-empty bag of semi-sweet chocolate chips, a small bag of pecans. She stood looking at them. She did not reach for them. She did not close the cabinet. She stood in front of the open shelf and looked at these ingredients the way a person looks at a locked door when they are not sure they have the key. From the stairs behind her, a sound, small feet on hardwood. Auden came into the kitchen in pajamas with a cereal box printed on the front, a shirt she had gotten at the Goodwill on Plank Road and had worn 3 nights in a row because it was soft, and she was 7 years old. 7-year-olds do not need more reason than that. She looked at her mother, standing in front of the open cabinet. She said, "Are we having breakfast?" Marcy looked at the $11 envelope in the drawer that would not close. She looked at her daughter. She did not answer. Not because she did not want to, because the answer she was beginning to form in her mind was not about breakfast, and she was not ready to say it out loud yet. The notebook was in a shoebox on the top shelf of the hallway closet. Marcy had not touched it in 4 years. She reached up and pulled the box down and carried it to the kitchen table and opened it. Inside, under a rubber band and a photograph of a woman in a church hat standing beside a folding table covered in aluminum foil pans, was a small notebook with a plastic cover. The plastic was clouded with age, and something that might have been oil or might have been butter or might have been both accumulated over decades of being open next to a stove. Several pages near the middle were stuck together. The handwriting inside was in pencil, small and slanted and precise. This was Grandma Opal's recipe notebook. Opal Delcine Odom had taught Marcy to bake in a kitchen not much bigger than this one, in a house 6 blocks from here that had since been torn down. Marcy was 9 the first time. Opal had put a step stool in front of the counter and told her to wash her hands twice, because once was for the dirt and twice was for the habit. Every Sunday for 22 years, Opal had baked cookies and brought them to Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church, where they were sold on a folding table in the fellowship hall after service. The money went to the building fund. The cookies went fast. People came to church early, not for the sermon, but for the table. This was known but not discussed openly, because discussing it would have required admitting something about priorities that the congregation was not prepared to examine. The recipe that sold out first every single Sunday without exception was the brown butter pecan cookie. Opal had developed it herself over years of small adjustments, a process she described not as experimentation, but as listening. She would say, "The butter tells you when it is done. Brown it until it smells like hazelnuts, not like burning. There is exactly 1 second between the two. Pay attention to that second." Opal died at 81. It was not dramatic. She had eaten Sunday dinner with the family, washed her own dishes, sat in her chair, and did not wake up the following morning. The doctor said it was her heart. The family said it was her time. Both of these things were probably true. She left behind very little that could be measured in money. She left behind the notebook. Marcy had not opened it in 4 years. She opened it that morning because she had $11.47 and a daughter who had asked about breakfast, and because the only thing she knew how to make that was worth more than its ingredients was the thing her grandmother had taught her. She turned to page 11. Brown butter pecan cookies. The pencil was faded, but the measurements were clear. Marcy set the butter in a small saucepan on the Kenmore and turned the dial to medium, which on this stove meant something closer to medium-high, which she knew and accounted for without thinking about it the same way her body had. Learned to account for all the small lies. The things in her life told her. The butter melted. Then it foamed. Then the foam subsided, and the color began to shift from yellow to gold, and from gold to something deeper, the color of light tea, and the smell changed. It stopped smelling like butter and started smelling like something else entirely. Warm and round and close to the smell of toasted hazelnuts, but not quite, because brown butter is its own thing and does not need a comparison to be understood. It needs only to be smelled once, and then you know it for the rest of your life. She pulled the pan off the heat and poured the butter into a bowl to stop the cooking. 1 second between hazelnut and burning. She had caught the right second. Grandma Opal would not have said anything about this. She would have simply nodded once and moved on to the next step, because praise was not part of the process. Auden had come into the kitchen and climbed onto the counter beside the stove. She sat with her legs hanging over the edge and watched. She did not ask what Marcy was doing. She just watched the way children watch when they sense that what is happening in front of them is not ordinary. Marcy measured the flour by hand. She did not own a kitchen scale. She used the scoop and level method her grandmother had used, which is not the method any baking textbook recommends, but which produced results that were consistent because Marcy's hands had been trained by Opal's hands, and the measurements lived in her muscles, not in numbers. She mixed the dough. She folded in the pecans and the chocolate chips. She dropped rounds onto a sheet pan lined with parchment paper that she had found in the back of a drawer left over from something she could not remember making. She put the pan in the oven. She set the dial to 350, which meant 375, and set a timer for 11 minutes, which at this temperature meant checking at 9 and pulling at 10 if the edges were golden. At 9 minutes, she opened the oven and rotated the pan because the Kenmore ran hot on the left side. At 10 minutes, she pulled the pan. The kitchen smelled like Grandma Opal's kitchen had smelled on Saturday nights when she was preparing for Sunday morning. The smell was so specific and so complete that for a moment Marcy stood still and let it be what it was without trying to make it into anything else. She let the cookies cool on the pan for 3 minutes, then transferred them to a wire rack. 36 cookies. She picked one up and broke it in half. The outside was firm. The inside was soft and slightly underset, which is what a cookie is supposed to be when it first comes out, because it continues to cook as it cools, and if you bake it to done in the oven, it will be overdone on the counter. She handed half to Auden. Auden bit into it and stopped chewing. Not because something was wrong. She slowed down. She chewed the way children chew when they are paying attention to what is in their mouth, instead of just processing it. She did not say it was good. She took another bite. Marcy looked at the 36 cookies on the cooling rack. She turned over the electric bill that was sitting on the counter and picked up a pen. On the back, she wrote, "Butter $3.50, flour $2, sugar $1.50, chocolate chips $3, eggs $1. Pecans, she had gotten those from the SNAP purchase and estimated $2. She added it up. $11.50 for 36 cookies, roughly 32 cents per cookie. She wrote another number below. If she sold them at $1.50 each, 36 times $1.50, $54, minus $11.50 in cost, $42.50. She looked at the number. She looked at the cookies. She looked at the $11.47 in the drawer that did not close. She did not call them beautiful. She called them ready. But ready for what she did not know yet. She had 36 cookies, and no place to sell them, and no one to sell them to, and no way to make anyone understand that these were not just cookies, that they were something her grandmother had built over decades and passed down in a notebook with a greasy plastic cover and faded pencil marks, and that they were better than anything on any shelf in any store she had ever walked through. She covered the cooling rack with a clean towel and put the notebook back in the shoebox and put the shoebox back on the shelf in the hallway closet. She wiped down the counter. She did these things because they were the next things to do. She had not yet figured out the thing after that. Mrs. Ernestine Ballard lived in the house directly to the left of Marcy's, separated by a chain-link fence and a strip of grass that neither of them mowed often enough. She was 74 years old. She had taught home economics at Capitol High School for 31 years before retiring, and she had been married to a man named Theodore Ballard for 46 years before he died quietly in his recliner on a Thursday evening, 6 years ago. She lived alone now. She kept her house clean and her yard passable and her opinions to herself unless someone asked for them, and sometimes when they did not. She had known Marcy since Marcy moved in. She had watched the pregnancy from across the fence without commenting on it. She had watched the husband stop appearing without asking about it. She had brought Auden peppermints on 3 occasions and a bag of hand-me-down clothes once, and she had done all of this without any conversation that lasted more than 4 minutes, because Ernestine Ballard understood that some people needed help, and most of those people did not want to be seen needing it. The morning after the cookies, Marcy put 6 of them in a small box that had once held checks from the bank and carried it next door. She knocked. Ernestine opened the door in a housecoat and reading glasses and looked at the box. Marcy said, "These are for you. Auden likes your peppermints so." She held out the box. Ernestine took it. She opened it on the porch and picked up a cookie and looked at it the way a person looks at something they are evaluating and not just receiving. She bit into it. She chewed slowly. She looked at Marcy. She said, "Who taught you to brown butter like this?" Marcy said. "My grandmother." Ernestine nodded. It was not a casual nod. It was the nod of a woman who had spent 31 years teaching young people the difference between cooking that followed instructions and cooking that came from somewhere deeper than instructions. She said, "Your grandmother knew what she was doing." She paused. "Do you?" Marcy did not understand the question at first. She said, "Do I what?" Ernestine said, "Know what you are doing with these." She held up the cookie. "Because these are not for a box from a checkbook. These are for selling." Marcy said, "I do not have a way to sell them." Ernestine looked at her for a moment over her reading glasses. She said, "Do you know about the cottage food law in this state?" Marcy did not. Ernestine said Louisiana allows you to make food in your own kitchen and sell it directly to people. No commercial kitchen required, no health department inspection. You need a label on every package. It has to say what is in it, where it was made, and that it was made in a home kitchen, not inspected by the state. You are capped at $20,000 a year in sales. You can sell at farmers markets, at church sales, at your front door if you want. You cannot sell online. You cannot sell through a store. Direct to the customer only. She said all of this the way she had once said things to classrooms of 16-year-olds, clearly and without pausing for questions, because the information was the point and the questions could come after. Marcy stood on the porch holding nothing because Ernestine was still holding the box. Ernestine said, "There is a farmer's market on Plank Road every Saturday. The vendor fee is $25. That is your next problem." She looked at Marcy. "I suspect you will figure it out." She took the box inside. The door closed. Marcy stood on the porch for a moment. Then she went home. She did not have $25. This was not entirely accurate. She had $11.47 minus whatever the cookie ingredients had cost from the SNAP supplies, which meant she had $11.47 because the SNAP items were already purchased and their cost was already spent. But $11.47 was not $25, and the distance between the two numbers was the kind of distance that felt larger than it was, because Marcy had been measuring distances in dollars for so long that every gap looked like a canyon. She thought about asking people at church. She thought about bringing cookies to her old co-workers at the office where she had been let go and asking if anyone wanted to buy some. She thought about posting on Facebook. She thought about each of these things and felt in each case a specific resistance that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with how she would look. A woman asking for something. A woman with a box of homemade cookies and a story about needing money. She had spent her whole adult life being careful not to look like she needed things, even when she did, especially when she did, and the thought of standing in front of people she knew, with a product in her hand and a price on her lips made something in her chest go tight in a way she could not argue with. She had spent so long counting what she did not have that she had forgotten to count what she did. Ray came over that Thursday. He was her older brother by 4 years. He worked as a plumber for a company on Greenwell Springs Road, and he came by when something in her house needed fixing, which was often because the house was old and the things inside it were older. That day, it was the kitchen faucet, which had been dripping at a rate of 1 drop every 6 seconds, which Marcy knew because she had counted it one night when she could not sleep. Ray fixed it in 20 minutes. He sat at the kitchen table afterward, and Marcy put a plate of cookies in front of him without explanation. He picked one up, he bit into it, he stopped. He looked at the cookie, then at Marcy. He said, "These are good." She said nothing. He said, "Like actually good, not good for homemade good. These are good." She said, "They are Grandma Opal's recipe." He said, "I know what they are. I have been eating them since I was 5. He took another bite. "How much you selling these for?" She said, "I am not selling them." He looked at her, the way older brothers look at younger sisters when the younger sister is being unreasonable, and both of them know it. He reached into his back pocket and took out his wallet and pulled out a 20 and a 5 and put them on the table between the plate and the sugar bowl. He said, "That is not a gift. That is an investment. I want 10% of nothing, which is still nothing, so you got no excuse." She looked at the money on the table. He said, "Take the 25, go to that market on Plank Road, and sell these cookies before I eat all of them, and you got nothing left to sell." He took 2 more from the plate, put 1 in each jacket pocket, and left through the back door. The screen door bounced twice behind him the way it always did. Marcy stood in the kitchen looking at the $25 on the table. The faucet was not dripping anymore. That was the first thing Ray had fixed that day. The $25 might have been the second. She woke at 3. The house was dark, and the street outside was dark, and the only sound was the refrigerator humming its low, steady hum. The sound a house makes when it is keeping things cold for someone who cannot afford to let them go bad. She had prepped the dough the night before. 6 batches mixed and portioned and wrapped in plastic and stacked in the refrigerator on the shelf beside the milk and the half-empty jar of grape jelly. She had done the math. 6 batches was 216 cookies. At $2 each, that was $432 if she sold every one. She would not sell every one. She knew that. But she had made 216 anyway, because the alternative was making fewer, and wondering later if fewer had been the reason. She turned on the oven, set the dial to 350, subtracted 25 inches, her head, began. The kitchen was small, and the work was repetitive, and she moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had practiced the same motions enough times that her hands no longer consulted her brain. Scoop, level, drop, space, pan in, timer on, pan out, rotate. Next pan. She worked in the yellow light of the single bulb above the stove, and by 5:15 she had 216 cookies cooling on every flat surface in the kitchen. The counter, the table, a cutting board balanced on top of 2 overturned mugs. She packed them into Ziploc bags, 3 cookies per bag. On each bag, she stuck a label she had written by hand the night before on adhesive paper Ernestine had given her. The label read Grandma Opal's brown butter pecan cookies. Below that, the ingredients. Below that, in smaller letters, the line Ernestine had told her was required. Made in a home kitchen not inspected by the Louisiana Department of Health. She had written 72 of these labels at the kitchen table while Auden slept. Her hand had cramped at label 40. She had kept writing. She loaded the bags into 2 cardboard boxes and carried them to the car. The car was a 2009 Nissan Sentra with a crack in the windshield and a passenger door that did not lock from the outside. She went back inside and picked up Auden, who was asleep on the couch in her clothes because Marcy had dressed her the night before to save time in the morning. Auden did not wake up. She hung in her mother's arms like something soft and boneless and trusting in the way only sleeping children are trusting. Marcy buckled her into the back seat. Auden's head fell to the side. Marcy drove. The Plank Road Farmers Market opened at 6 on Saturdays. When Marcy arrived at 5:45, the parking lot was already half full with vendors unloading trucks and vans. She could hear the sound of folding tables being snapped open and locked into place. The metallic click of legs straightening. Somewhere a man was stacking crates of tomatoes in careful rows. A woman poured coffee from a thermos into a paper cup and stood drinking it in the half-dark with her eyes closed. The air smelled like morning, damp and still cool with the particular sweetness that Louisiana air carries before the heat takes over. Marcy set up her table. She had no tablecloth. She had no display stand. She had 2 cardboard boxes of cookies in Ziploc bags and a piece of cardboard she had cut from a shipping box and written on with a black marker. Grandma Opal's brown butter pecan cookies. $2 each. 3 for $5. She propped the sign against one of the boxes. She stood behind the table. Auden was still asleep in the car with the windows cracked. The market opened. People came. They walked along the rows of vendors looking at produce and honey and hot sauce and bread. They walked past Marcy's table. Some glanced. Most did not. She smiled at the ones who glanced. They smiled back and kept walking. This is what it looks like when people have already decided something is not for them. They do not stop. They do not slow down. They adjust their path slightly. The way a river adjusts around a stone, it does not notice. 2 hours passed. She had not sold a single cookie. Auden woke up sometime after 8 and came to the table rubbing her eyes. Marcy gave her a cookie and a juice box, and Auden sat on the ground behind the table with a crayon and the back of one of the labels and began drawing. After a while, she moved to the table surface itself and continued drawing there, her small body visible just above the table edge. A woman in a green jacket stopped. She was not looking at the cookies. She was looking at Auden. She said, "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Auden looked up. She said, "My mom's cookies." The woman looked at the cookies. She looked at Marcy. She said, "Can I try one?" Marcy opened a bag. The woman bit into a cookie and did the thing that Auden had done and Ray had done and Ernestine had done before her. She slowed down. She looked at what was in her hand. She bought 3. She came back 20 minutes later and bought 6 more. She brought a friend. The friend bought 6. By 10:30, there was a small, steady line at Marcy's table that had not been there 2 hours earlier and that no one, including Marcy, fully understood the cause of. Word of mouth is not a strategy. It is a consequence. It is what happens when a product is good enough that the person who buys it cannot help telling the next person they see. By noon, she had sold 180 cookies. 36 bags remained. She packed them back into the box. She folded the table. She carried Auden to the car. She sat in the driver's seat and counted the money. Bills first, then coins. She flattened each bill against her thigh, the way she always did, pressing out the creases, making the money neat. She put it in the envelope she had brought, the same envelope from the drawer beside the stove. $330, minus roughly $100 in ingredients and the $25 vendor fee. $205 in profit from cookies, from a recipe in a notebook with a greasy plastic cover, from a Saturday morning and a 7-year-old who had drawn a picture at the right moment for the right stranger. She did not cry. She folded the envelope closed. It was thicker than it had been that morning. She put it in her bag and started the car and drove home. The second Saturday was easier because the fear was smaller. The third Saturday was easier still. By the 4th week, she had regulars. People who came to the market specifically for her table and who were annoyed when she sold out before they arrived, which she began doing by 11, then by 10, 30, then by 10. Week 1, $330. Week 2, $410. Week 3, $380. Because it rained and the market closed early, and the people who did come moved fast under umbrellas and did not stop for cookies. Week 4, $520. She had started bringing more. She had started taking orders for church events and birthday parties. A woman named Charlene asked for 5 dozen for a family reunion in Plaquemine and paid in advance and told Marcy she would tell her cousins. On the 5th Saturday, Marcy arrived with 3 products instead of 1. She had spent the week experimenting. Snickerdoodles, lemon shortbread. She had made them carefully, and she had packaged them with the same labels and the same attention, and she had been proud of the variety. The snickerdoodles sold 7 bags. The lemon shortbread sold 4. The brown butter pecan cookies sold out by 9:45. By noon, she was sitting behind a table with 2 products that people looked at and walked past, and 1 product that was gone. She told Ernestine about it that evening. She said she thought people would want options. Ernestine was sitting on her porch with a glass of sweet tea. She said, "A restaurant that does 1 dish perfectly will outlive a restaurant that does 20 dishes adequately. That is not my opinion. That is arithmetic." Marcy did not bring snickerdoodles or lemon shortbread to the market again. She brought brown butter, pecan cookies. More of them. Only them. The market had told her what it wanted. She had listened. She had tried to be everything, and the market had told her to be one thing very well. There was also the man. He appeared on the 3rd Saturday and came back every week after. He bought 2 bags each time. He paid in cash. He did not make conversation. He would walk up, point at the cookies, hand over the bills, nod once, and leave. Marcy did not know his name. She called him the quiet regular in her head. She did not know yet that he mattered. She would. The email came on a Tuesday. It was from the market manager, a woman named Deanna, who wore a sun visor and carried a clipboard and spoke in the efficient, practiced tone of someone who managed 40 vendors and had no time for conversations that did not contain a point. The email said that a complaint had been filed. Another vendor, a woman who sold pralines from a commercial kitchen in Gonzales, had raised a concern. The concern was that Marcy was operating without a commercial food license. The concern was valid in the sense that it was technically accurate and invalid in the sense that it was motivated not by public safety but by the fact that Marcy's table was outselling hers. The cottage food law allowed Marcy to sell at the market. She knew that. Ernestine had told her that. But the law had a ceiling, $20,000 per year. Marcy had been at the market for 2 months. She was averaging $430 per Saturday, 52 Saturdays per year, projected annual revenue, $22,360. She was going to cross the line. Not if, when. She went to the Scotlandville branch of the East Baton Rouge Parish Library the following afternoon. She sat at one of the public computers and typed Louisiana Food Business License into the search bar. She read for 2 hours. She learned the difference between cottage food and a commercial food license. She learned that a commercial food license required a certified commercial kitchen, which meant a kitchen inspected and approved by the Louisiana Department of Health, with stainless steel surfaces and commercial-grade ventilation and hot water at a specific temperature and a 3-compartment sink for washing. She learned that renting time in a commercial kitchen cost between $15 and $25 per hour depending on the facility. She learned that she would also need liability insurance, which started at around $400 per year. She added it up. She had not brought a calculator. She used the back of a receipt from the dollar store. The numbers were not small. They were not impossible either, but they were the kind of numbers that require a person to have already been making money before they can spend money to keep making money. The system was built in a circle. To grow, she needed a license. To get a license, she needed a kitchen. To afford a kitchen, she needed to have already grown. She closed the laptop. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the library, with the receipt in her hand and the numbers on it that she had written, and the specific weight of information that is useful and discouraging at the same time. She had closed the computer because the information was heavy. She opened it again because heavy was not the same as impossible. She went home and called Ernestine. She told her about the email and the complaint and the $20,000 cap and the commercial kitchen requirement. Ernestine listened. Then she said, "New Hope Baptist on Florida Boulevard." Marcy said, "What about it?" Ernestine said, "Their kitchen. It was certified as a commercial kitchen 4 years ago. The pastor's wife had a catering business. They registered it so she could use it. She stopped catering 2 years ago, but the certification is still active. They rent it out. $12 an hour." Marcy said nothing for a moment. Ernestine said 12 is not 25. I checked. Marcy drove to New Hope Baptist the following Thursday. The church was a low brick building on Florida Boulevard, with a white cross above the entrance and a parking lot that needed repaving and a sign out front that listed service times and a Bible verse that changed weekly. She went inside and asked for the pastor. A woman in the office told her he was in the fellowship hall. She walked down the hallway and found him setting up chairs for a Thursday evening Bible study. His name was Reverend Lewis. He was in his 60s. He had large hands and a calm manner, and he listened to Marcy explain what she needed without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The kitchen is available Tuesday and Thursday nights, 6 to 10. Bring your own ingredients. $12 an hour. We ask that you leave it cleaner than you found it." That was all. No speech, no encouragement, no laying on of hands. A door was available, and he told her where the handle was. What she did with it was her business. Marcy walked into the kitchen. It was 4 times the size of her kitchen at home. 2 commercial ovens, stainless steel, counters, a 3-compartment sink, overhead ventilation, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. Everything was clean and industrial and precise in a way that her kitchen at home was not. She touched the stainless steel counter. It was cold. She put her palm flat against it and felt the temperature of professional equipment, the specific neutrality of surfaces that are designed to be sanitized and that do not absorb the memory of what has been made on them. Her kitchen at home had a counter with a burn mark from a pot she had left too long and a stain from a cup of grape juice Auden had spilled and never fully cleaned. Those marks were specific. This counter had no marks. It was waiting. She turned to the ovens. She opened the first one and looked at the temperature dial. She turned it to 350. She did not subtract 25. She did not need to. This oven did not lie. She had been baking in a kitchen where the equipment told her the wrong temperature, and she had learned to correct for it the way a person learns to walk with a limp and stops noticing the limp until the day the leg is healed and walking straight feels strange. She did not know what to do with equipment that told the truth. She would learn. The first week in the church kitchen went well. She doubled her output. 432 cookies instead of 216. She sold out by 9:30 on Saturday. She came home that night and sat at the kitchen table and counted the money, and the number was larger than any number she had counted before in her life that belonged to her. The second week, she decided to push further. 500 cookies. She arrived at the church kitchen on Tuesday at 6 and began. She scaled the recipe up. More butter, more flour, more sugar, more pecans. She used the larger bowls the church kitchen had. She filled 4 sheet pans instead of 2 and put them all in at once because the ovens were larger, and she assumed larger ovens meant more capacity, which was true. But she did not yet understand that more capacity did not mean identical conditions. A home oven is a small space. The heat wraps around the pan. A commercial oven is a larger space. The heat circulates differently. The edges of a large oven are hotter than the center. The top rack bakes faster than the bottom. These are things that professional bakers know the way professional drivers know the feel of a road. Marcy was not a professional baker. She was a woman with a recipe and an oven that had finally stopped lying to her. And she had assumed that an honest oven was the same as a simple one. She pulled the first batch at 11 minutes. The cookies on the outside edges of the pan were dark, too dark. The ones in the center were pale and soft. She pulled the second batch. Same problem, but worse. The third batch she had tried to correct by rotating the pans halfway through. It helped on one pan. On the other, the damage was already done. She stood at the counter at 10:45 at night and sorted the cookies into 3 piles. The first pile was sellable, 150 cookies. The second pile was slightly overbaked on the edges, edible, but not up to her standard, 150 cookies. The third pile was underdone in the middle, the kind of cookie that would collapse when a customer picked it up. 200 cookies, 350 cookies that could not go to market. She sat on the floor of the church kitchen. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her. The stainless steel counters reflected the light in a flat, indifferent way. She looked at the 3 piles on the counter and did the math. $120 in ingredients, $48 in kitchen rental, 5 hours of labor. She added these numbers together, and the total did not care that she had woken up at 4 in the morning. The total did not care that she had driven across town with her daughter asleep in the back seat. The total did not care about effort or intention, or the number of hours she had spent standing on a concrete floor. The math did not care about effort. The math was just the math. She sat there for a long time. Then she stood up and cleaned the kitchen and loaded the 150 sellable cookies into boxes and drove home. She would sell them on Saturday. She would lose money this week. She would not lose the lesson. She went home and pulled the shoebox from the hallway closet and brought it to the kitchen table and opened the notebook. She turned to page 11. The recipe, the measurements she had memorized years ago. But this time she did not look at the recipe itself. She looked at the margins. Grandma Opal had written in the margins the way some people write in the margins of Bibles. Small notes in pencil squeezed between the printed lines of her own handwriting. Additions made at different times with different pencils. Some sharp, some dull, the graphite, varying in darkness, the way it does when notes are added over. Years. Near the bottom of the page, below the baking instructions in handwriting, that was smaller and more cramped than the rest, as though it had been added later and in a hurry, were 2 lines. For the church oven, reduce temp 15 degrees and add 2 minutes, rotate halfway. Bottom rack only. Marcy read the lines twice. Then she read them again. Grandma Opal had baked in a church kitchen. She had stood in front of a commercial oven that was not her own and figured out how to make her recipe work inside it. She had done this 40 years ago. She had written down what she learned in the margin of the same page Marcy had been reading from all along, and Marcy had never seen it because she had never needed to see it until now. She traced the handwriting with her finger. The ink was faded, but the instruction was not. She sat at the table for a while. She did not cry. She was not the kind of person who cried at kitchen tables. She was the kind of person who wrote things down. She picked up a pen. Below her grandmother's note, in her own handwriting, she wrote, "For New Hope Commercial Oven. 335 degrees, 13 minutes. Rotate at 7. Top and bottom racks okay if staggered." 2 sets of instructions. 2 generations. The same problem solved 40 years apart on the same page of the same notebook. Opal's pencil above, Marcy's pen below. The page was crowded now. It was better that way. She closed the notebook and put it back in the shoebox. She did not put the shoebox back on the shelf in the hallway closet. She put it on the counter beside the stove where she could reach it without climbing. The quiet regular came to the market on a Saturday in late September. He bought his 2 bags the same way he always did. Cash, nod, no conversation. But this time, he did not leave. He stood to the side of the table holding his bags and waited until the 2 women in front of Marcy had paid and moved on. Then he stepped forward. He said, "My name is Marcus Thibodeau. I own a restaurant on Government Street in Mid-City. It is called Thibodeau's. It seats 42 people, and we are open 5 nights a week." Marcy looked at him. She had seen this man every Saturday for 3 months. She had never heard him say more than 2 words in sequence. He said, "I have been buying your cookies for 3 months. I serve them as dessert at my restaurant. I do not make dessert. I never have. I buy yours and I plate them, and my customers keep asking where I get them. They are the only dessert on the menu, and they are the reason some people come back." He paused. He was not a man who was comfortable with long speeches. She could see him managing the effort of it. He said, "I need 200 a week, every week. Can you do that?" Marcy did the math before she answered. 200 cookies per week. She was currently making about 450 for the market. Adding 200 meant 650 total. More hours at the church kitchen, more ingredients, more packing, more driving. She said, "What price?" He said, $1 a cookie. I know you sell them for 2 at the market. I am asking for wholesale. I will pick them up every Wednesday. $1 per cookie. Half the retail price. She did the math on the spot the way she had been doing math on the backs of receipts for months. 200 cookies at $1 each. $200 per week. Her cost per cookie was roughly 32 cents. Profit per cookie, at wholesale 68 cents. At retail, $1.68, less per unit. But 200 guaranteed per week, rain or shine. No table, no market fee, no standing, for 6 hours, hoping people stopped. She made less per cookie, and more per week. That was the math of growing. She said, "I can do that. Starting next Wednesday." He nodded once. He took a card from his shirt pocket and put it on the table. It was a plain white business card with the restaurant name and a phone number. Nothing else. He picked up his 2 bags of cookies and left the way he always left, quietly, without ceremony. A man who said what he needed and then was finished talking. Marcy looked at the card on the table. She picked it up and put it in the envelope in her bag, the one that held the money. It sat on top of the bills like a different kind of currency, not cash, proof. The first year ended in December. Marcy sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night and added up the numbers in the notebook she had been keeping since the first Saturday at the market. Not the recipe notebook. A different one. A composition book from the dollar store, with a black and white marbled cover, the kind children use in school. She had written every sale in it, every expense, every Saturday total, every wholesale delivery to Marcus. Every cost of flour and butter and sugar and pecans and parchment paper and Ziploc bags and labels and market fees and kitchen rental. The total revenue for the year was $19,200. She looked at the number for a long time. It was $800 below the cottage food ceiling of $20,000. She had watched the number approach that line for the last 2 months, and she had made a decision without telling anyone that she would stop before she crossed it. Not because she wanted to stop, because crossing it meant entering a different category, a different legal structure, a different set of requirements she was not yet ready to meet. She had held back. She had turned down 2 orders in November. She had told a woman who wanted 500 cookies for a church gala that she could not do it. She had said no to money in order to stay inside a line she could manage. $19,200. From cookies, from a recipe in a notebook, from a kitchen where the oven lied by 25 degrees and a church kitchen where it did not. The small things had changed. She had paid the electric bill on time 4 months in a row, the first time since she lost her job. Auden had new shoes for the school year, not expensive shoes. Shoes that fit and that did not have someone else's name written inside them in marker. The refrigerator was not empty. It was not full in the way refrigerators are full in commercials, but it had milk and eggs and lunch meat and grape jelly and the specific dignity of shelves that are not bare. She was still tired. She still woke at 4. The week her car broke down, she walked to the market, pulling a wagon with cookie boxes stacked inside it. 11 blocks in the dark, with Auden walking beside her, holding a flashlight. The success had not removed the difficulty. It had added purpose to the difficulty. The waking up was the same. The reason for it had changed. The Kenmore at home still ran 25 degrees hot. She still used it for small batches test runs, orders for neighbors. She had access to ovens that told the truth now, but she still came home to the one that lied. There was something in that she was not ready to let go of. The oven had been there at the beginning. It had been part of the first batch, the one she made with $11.47 worth of ingredients, while her daughter sat on the counter and watched. Replacing it would have been practical. She was not ready to be practical about it. Ernestine came over on New Year's Day with a plate of black-eyed peas and rice, because that was what Ernestine did on New Year's Day. She sat at the kitchen table, and Marcy told her the number. 19,200. Ernestine nodded. She ate a forkful of peas. Then she said, "Next year you need to decide if this is a hobby or a business, because 20,000 is where the law makes you choose." She did not say it as advice. She said it as fact. The way she said everything, the way a woman who had spent 31 years teaching young people said things, clearly, once, without softening. Marcy chose. She went to the library on the second Monday of January and sat at the same public computer she had sat at months before. She typed Louisiana LLC registration into the search bar. She read the form. She read it again. She filled it out. The filing fee was $100. She paid it with a debit card attached to the account she had opened in October with the first $330 from the market. The following week, she took a food handler certification course online. It cost $15 and took 4 hours. She sat at the kitchen table with the laptop Ernestine had lent her and answered questions about temperature, danger zones, and cross-contamination and proper hand-washing technique. She passed. She printed the certificate at the library. She called the Louisiana Department of Health and asked about a commercial food license. The woman on the phone explained the requirements: a certified commercial kitchen, an inspection, liability insurance. Marcy wrote each item on the back of an envelope. The liability insurance was $480 per year. She called 3 companies and got quotes and chose the one that was $480 because it was the lowest and because she could afford it if she was careful. She went back to New Hope Baptist and spoke to Reverend Lewis. She asked for a formal rental agreement, a signed document that stated the kitchen was a certified commercial facility and that she was an authorized user. He wrote it by hand on church letterhead and signed it, and she thanked him and put it in a folder she had bought at the dollar store for 79 cents. She submitted the application. She waited. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail from the Louisiana Department of Health. She opened it on the porch because she did not want to open it inside in case the answer was no and the kitchen held the memory of it. It was not no. She held the license, a piece of paper with her name on it and the name of the business she had registered, Grandma Opal's LLC, and the words commercial food license, and a date and a signature from someone she had never met. Ray came by that afternoon. He saw the paper on the table. He picked it up and read it. He said, "You saved $3,000 in a year selling cookies. You really about to spend $750 of it on paper." Marcy said, Paper is the difference between a woman selling cookies and a business selling cookies. Ray looked at her. He put the paper down. He said, "All right then." She did not frame the license. She did not hang it on the wall. She folded it and put it in the drawer beside the stove. The same drawer that held the envelope. The same drawer that had held $11.47 on the morning this began. The drawer still did not close all the way, but what was inside it had changed. By April of the second year, Marcy was baking at the church kitchen 3 nights a week instead of 2. She was selling at 2 farmers markets, Plank Road on Saturdays and a smaller one on Perkins Road on Sundays. She was filling Marcus's weekly order of 200 cookies every Wednesday. She had started taking orders through a Facebook page that Auden had helped her set up, which she was now legally allowed to do because the commercial license removed the direct sale only restriction of the cottage food law. Revenue in April was $4,100 in a single month. She stared at the number in the composition book and read it twice, because numbers that large still felt like they belonged to someone else. But the number carried weight on the other side too. She was baking 600 cookies a week. She was at the church kitchen from 6 to 10 on Tuesday, Thursday, and now Saturday mornings before the market. She was up at 3:30 on baking days and 4 on market days. She was mixing dough and portioning dough and baking dough and cooling cookies and packing cookies and labeling bags and loading boxes and driving to markets and standing behind tables and smiling at strangers and driving to Marcus's restaurant and carrying boxes through the back door and driving home. Auden helped. She was 9 now, and she had learned to seal Ziploc bags and apply labels with a precision that Marcy appreciated and that she suspected Auden had inherited from Opal, who had always believed that the way a thing was presented mattered as much as the thing itself. After school, Auden would sit at the kitchen table and work through a stack of bags while Marcy prepped dough for the next bake. One evening, while Auden was labeling and Marcy was measuring flour, Auden said, "Mom, why don't you just make less, so you don't have to work so much?" Marcy stopped measuring. She held the cup of flour over the bowl. She did not put it down. She stood there with the cup in her hand and looked at her daughter, who was 9 years old and who had asked the question that Marcy had been asking herself in the dark at 3:30 in the morning and had not been able to answer. She put the cup down. She said, "That is a good question." Auden waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned it young. Marcy said, "I do not know the answer yet." That was true. She did not know whether what she was building was something she wanted to keep growing or something she was growing because stopping felt like going backward. She knew she was tired. She knew the tiredness had a texture now that was different from the tiredness of 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the tiredness was empty. Now it was full of purpose and flour dust and the smell of brown butter and the sound of her daughter counting labels at the kitchen table. But full is still heavy. Full might be heavier. She also knew this was the first thing in her life that had her name on it. Not a job title, not an employee badge, her name, on a license, on a bag, on a sign at the market. She had built it from $11.47 and a recipe and a kitchen that lied about its own temperature. She was not ready to make it smaller. She was not sure she was able to make it bigger. She was standing in the exact middle of those two things, and the middle is not a place where answers live. It is a place where decisions wait. The call came on a Thursday at 8:14 in the evening. Marcy was in the church kitchen rolling dough for the Saturday batch. Her hands were covered in flour. Her phone was on the counter beside the sink face up, and when it lit up, the caller ID showed a number she did not recognize. Area code 479, Arkansas. She almost did not answer. She had been getting calls from numbers she did not recognize for weeks. Car warranty, solar panels, student loan forgiveness for loans she had never taken. She had stopped answering unfamiliar numbers, the way most people stop answering unfamiliar numbers by letting them go to voicemail and deleting the voicemail without listening. But something made her pick up. She could not explain what. Later, she would think about this and still not be able to explain it. She wiped her right hand on her apron and picked up the phone and said, "Hello." A man's voice. Professional, but not stiff. He said his name, was Derek Whitmore. He said he was a regional buyer for Walmart, based in Bentonville, Arkansas. He said he was calling about her cookies. Marcy stood in the church kitchen with the phone against her ear and flour on her left hand and the dough going warm on the counter, and she did not move. He explained, Walmart runs a program called Open Call. Once a year, they invite small manufacturers and producers from across the country to come to Bentonville and pitch their products directly to buyers. The goal is to find products made in America by small businesses that have something the big brands do not. A store manager in Baton Rouge had bought a bag of cookies at the Plank Road Farmers Market. He had eaten one in his car in the parking lot. He had brought the rest to his regional meeting. Someone at that meeting had sent a bag to Bentonville. Derek had tried one. He said, I want to invite you to this year's open call. It is in 6 weeks. You would come to Bentonville. You would have 15 minutes to present your product. If we move forward, we would start with a regional placement. He said this calmly, the way a man says something he says often to many people. This was not a special moment for him. This was a Tuesday in his week. He had called other people before her and would call other people after. Then he listed what she would need to bring. Product samples in retail-ready packaging, a UPC barcode, proof of liability insurance, food safety certification, documentation of her production facility, evidence that she could meet volume requirements, which for a regional placement meant several thousand units per week. He said she should also be prepared to discuss shelf life pricing and distribution. Each item landed on her with individual weight. Retail-ready packaging. She had Ziploc bags with handwritten labels, a UPC barcode. She did not know what that cost or how to get one. Several thousand units per week. She was making 650. He asked if she had any questions. She said no. He said the details would be sent to her email. He asked for her email. She gave it to him. He said he looked forward to meeting her. He said goodbye. She said, thank you. I will be there. She hung up. She put the phone down on the counter. She stood in the church kitchen under the fluorescent lights with the dough on the counter and the ovens warm and the faint buzz of the ventilation overhead, and she did not move for a long time. She looked down at her hands, flour in the lines of her palms, dough under 2 fingernails, the specific evidence of a Wednesday night spent doing what she had been doing every Wednesday night for months, making cookies, in a church kitchen, by herself. She sat down on the floor. The tile was cold through her jeans. She sat on the floor of the church kitchen for the second time. The first time she had sat because she had failed. This time she sat because her legs had made a decision about what they were willing to support. She sat there for a while. Then she stood up and finished the batch. The 6 weeks that followed were the most concentrated weeks of Marcy's life. She made a list on the back of a church bulletin the night of the call. Packaging, barcode, co-packer. Each word was a problem she had not solved yet. She started with packaging. She could not bring Ziploc bags with handwritten labels to Bentonville. She needed a real package. A printed bag with a logo and a nutrition panel and an ingredient list and a barcode and the specific appearance of something that belonged on a shelf beside things made by companies with entire departments devoted to packaging. She found a freelance designer on the internet, a woman in Atlanta who charged $150 for a package design. Marcy sent her the recipe notebook page, a photograph of the cookies, and the words, Grandma Opal's Brown Butter Pecan Cookies. A Baton Rouge kitchen table recipe since 1981. The designer sent back a proof 4 days later. It was clean and warm and did not look like a Ziploc bag. Marcy approved it. The barcode cost $250 through GS1. She paid it and received a number that meant her product existed in the system that stores used to track inventory. A number, that was all. But it was the number that made the difference between something you sold at a table and something a scanner could read. The co-packer was the hardest. She needed a facility that could produce thousands of cookies per week using her recipe following FDA manufacturing standards. She called 3 co-packing facilities in Louisiana. The first required a minimum order of 10,000 units. The second had a setup fee of $5,000. The third did not return her call. She found the fourth through Marcus. He knew a man who knew a woman who ran a small baking facility in Hammond, an hour east of Baton Rouge. The facility was modest. 2 production lines. A staff of 11. They agreed to do a trial batch. 300 cookies, using Marcy's recipe baked in their ovens packaged in the new bags. She drove to Hammond with the recipe notebook in her lap. This was the part she had not been able to settle. The recipe was in the notebook. The notebook was Grandma Opal's. Giving it to a factory meant someone else's hands would make the cookies. Hands that had not been trained by Opal. Hands that did not know the difference between the smell of hazelnuts and the smell of burning. Hands that had never stood on a step stool at 9 years old and been told to wash twice. She sat in her car in the parking lot of the co-packing facility for 10 minutes before going inside. That evening she told Ernestine about it. She said she felt like she was giving something away. Ernestine was sitting on her porch. She said, "Your grandmother gave you the recipe. She did not tell you to guard it, she told you to use it," Marcy said. "She told me to use it, not to give it to a factory in Hammond," Ernestine said. "She told you to feed people. She did not specify how many." Marcy sat with that. Then she went inside and took the notebook to the facility the next morning and stood beside the production manager and walked through every step, every temperature, every timing. She watched the first batch come out. She broke a cookie in half. The outside was firm. The inside was soft. The smell was right. It was not identical to hers. It was close enough to be worthy of the name on the bag. She drove to Bentonville on a Sunday, 7 hours in the car. Auden stayed with Ernestine. The drive was flat and long, and she spent most of it not listening to the radio and not thinking about what she was going to say, because she had already decided what she was going to say, and going over it again would only make it worse. She arrived in the evening. She checked into a hotel that was not expensive and not comfortable, and that she had booked because it was the closest one to the Walmart home office that she could afford. She put the box of sample cookies on the desk and the folder of documents beside it, and she sat on the bed and looked at them. Retail-ready packaging, UPC barcode, liability insurance certificate, food handler certification, commercial food license, co-packing agreement, production capacity projections she had written on the back of a church bulletin and then transferred to a typed document at the library. She had everything they had asked for. She had everything except the certainty that she belonged in the room. The building was large. She knew it would be large. She had seen photographs. But large in a photograph is not the same as large when you are standing in front of it, holding a box of cookies in both hands. There were hundreds of people in the hallways, other vendors, other small businesses, people with rolling displays and branded tablecloths and printed banners. A man carried a case of hot sauce. A woman rolled a suitcase filled with handmade soap. Everyone was moving with the specific energy of people who had something to prove, and 15 minutes to prove it. Marcy wore a blazer she had borrowed from Ernestine. It was slightly too wide in the shoulders. She had not owned a blazer. She had not needed one. She held the box of cookies against her chest and walked to the room number she had been given in the email. The room was small. A table, 2 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other. Derek Whitmore was already seated. He was younger than his voice. He had a notepad and a pen and a bottle of water, and the efficient posture of a person who had been doing this all day and had 7 more after her. He said, "Tell me about your product." She did not have slides. She did not have a presentation board. She did not have anything except the box and the folder and the story. She told him about Grandma Opal, about the kitchen on a Saturday night before church, about the step stool and the instruction to wash your hands twice, about the notebook with the greasy plastic cover, about the morning she opened it because she had $11.47 and a daughter who had asked about breakfast, about the Kenmore oven that ran 25 degrees hot, about the first Saturday at the market when nobody stopped and then a 7-year-old drew a picture and everything changed. Then she opened the box and said, "This is what $11.47 became." Derek took a cookie. He bit into it. He chewed, slowly. He set the cookie down and wrote something on his notepad. Then he asked questions. What was the shelf life? Marcy said 8 weeks. in sealed packaging. What was the unit cost at scale? She said $1.12 at 5,000 units per week. What was her suggested retail price? She said $3.99 for a 6-pack. What was her current production capacity? She said 5,000 per week through the Hammond facility. Scalable to 12,000 within 60 days. He wrote each answer down. He did not react to them. He did not smile or nod or show any indication of whether the numbers were good or bad or somewhere in between. He was a man doing math, and math does not make faces. When she finished, he looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked up. He said, "We are going to start with 50 stores in Louisiana. If it performs, we expand to the region." He said this the way he said everything, calmly, without drama, in a room with a table and 2 bottles of water and a box of cookies. Marcy said, "Thank you." She stood. She picked up the box. She walked out of the room and down the long hallway past the other vendors who were still waiting, and she went outside and stood in the parking lot of the Walmart home office in Bentonville, Arkansas, in Ernestine's blazer that did not, and she took out her phone and called Ernestine. Ernestine answered on the second ring. She always did, Marcy said. 50 stores. There was a silence on the line. Not a long one. Just enough. Then Ernestine said, "Well, I suppose you had better get baking." She picked up Auden from Ernestine's house the following evening. Auden was on the porch drawing when the car pulled up. She came down the steps and got in and buckled her seatbelt and looked at her mother. She said, "Did they like the cookies?" Marcy said, "They are going to put them in 50 stores." Auden thought about this. Her face did the thing it always did when she was processing a number. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a small tilt of the head. She said, "Is that a lot?" Marcy said, "It is more than our kitchen." Auden nodded. She accepted this the way she accepted most things, with the quiet completeness of a child who has learned that her mother's answers are usually the right size for the question. They drove home. Marcy parked in the driveway and they went inside, and Marcy went to the hallway closet and took down the shoebox and brought it to the kitchen table. She opened the notebook. She turned to the first page. There, in Opal's handwriting, in pencil that had faded but not disappeared, was a line she had read many times, but that she read differently now. "For my granddaughter, so she always has something to start with." Marcy picked up a pen. Below her grandmother's words, in her own handwriting, she wrote 2 words. "For Auden." She closed the notebook. She put it back in the shoebox. A shoebox on the counter beside the stove, where it had lived since the night she found the church oven note. 2 generations of handwriting inside it. 3 generations of hands that had held the same recipe. She opened the drawer beside the stove. The envelope was still there. It was thick, now not with cash, but with the things a business accumulates, receipts, a copy of the LLC filing, the food handler certificate, the commercial license, the liability insurance card, and a small business card, white, with a name and an address, Grandma Opal's, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The drawer still did not close all the way. She did not fix it. She had never fixed it. She was not going to fix it now. She turned on the Kenmore. She set the dial to 350, which meant 375, which she knew and corrected for without thinking. She took butter from the refrigerator and put it in a saucepan and browned it the way Opal had taught her. She made a small batch. 36 cookies. Not for the market, not for Marcus, not for Walmart, for Auden and Ernestine and Ray and the kitchen table. She pulled them out of the oven that lied and set them on the counter to cool. The kitchen smelled the way it always smelled when she baked, like brown butter and pecans and the specific warmth of something being made by hand in a room that had seen a lot of mornings. 3 months later, on a Saturday, Marcy drove to the Walmart on Airline Highway. She parked in the lot and got out and went inside. Auden was with her. Ernestine was with her. Ernestine had driven herself, which was the first time she had driven farther than the grocery store in 2 years. She had said she was not going to miss this. She had said it once, and without softening. They walked through the entrance, past the registers, past produce, past the bread aisle. They turned into aisle 9, shelf 4. There, Between a national brand that Marcy had seen on television her entire life and a store brand she had never noticed was a small package. The design was clean and warm. The logo read Grandma Opals. Below the logo, in smaller type, was a line that Marcy had asked the designer to include: a Baton Rouge kitchen table recipe since 1981. Opal Delcine Odom had never stood in a Walmart. She had never seen the inside of a factory in Hammond. She had never met a regional buyer from Bentonville, or filled out a form for a UPC barcode, or signed a co-packing agreement. She had baked cookies in a kitchen and brought them to a church and put them on a folding table every Sunday for 22 years because people were hungry and she knew how to make something that fed them. She was on this shelf now, not her body, not her name in brushed metal letters above an entrance, a recipe, a set of instructions she had written in pencil in a notebook, with a greasy plastic cover passed to a granddaughter who had opened it on a morning when she had nothing else and who had followed it one step at a time the way you do hard things. Marcy did not start with a dream. She started with $11.47 and a daughter who asked about breakfast. The dream came later, after the work. After the market and the church kitchen and the floor she sat on twice and the oven that lied and the one that did not. After the quiet regular and the email from the market manager and the envelope that went from thin to thick inside a drawer that never closed. Some businesses begin with a plan, with capital and projections and a board of directors. Others begin at a kitchen table at 4 a.m. with a recipe that someone you loved wrote down because she believed it was worth keeping. Both kinds are real. Both kinds cost something. The difference is only where the money starts. Ernestine stood beside Marcy in the aisle. She looked at the package on the shelf. She adjusted her glasses. She read the label. She read the line about 1,981. She said nothing for a moment. Then she put her hand on Marcy's arm. Briefly, the way people touch you when what they are feeling is too large for language, and a hand is what is available. Auden reached up and touched the package. She said, "That is our name." Marcy said, "That is your great-grandmother's name." Outside the Walmart on Airline Highway, the parking lot was full of people going about their Saturday, the way people do, getting what they needed and leaving. Inside on shelf 4 of aisle 9 between the national brands and the private labels was a small package with a name on it that had started in a kitchen and had not stopped. Marceline Odom had $11.47, a 7-year-old daughter, and a cookie recipe her grandmother left behind. She started baking before sunrise in a kitchen with an oven that ran 25 degrees too hot. 2 years later, she got a call from Walmart's headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. This is not a fairy tale. This is a story about what it actually takes to go from a home kitchen to a retail shelf. The cottage food laws, the commercial licenses, the pricing, math, the failures, and the one phone call that changed everything. Topics in this video: Louisiana cottage food law, how to start a food business from home commercial, kitchen licensing, product pricing, and cost of goods sold, COGS wholesale versus retail strategy, Walmart open call program, co-packing for small food businesses, UPC barcodes, liability insurance for food entrepreneurs, and the real math behind scaling a recipe into a livelihood. Thank you for watching. Before you go, if you had $11.47 and a recipe from someone you loved, would you have started? Tell us in the comments. See you in the next one.